The Supreme Court is an incredibly important part of our three-pronged government. We have the congressional branch, which focuses on creating and establishing laws that, according to constituents of the individual states, will best represent and benefit them. And the idea is that by serving individually, we will help collectively. Then you have the executive, or the president, whose job is to enforce these rules as well as to ensure that we have stable foreign relations with countries outside of the United States. Basically, they're the figurehead and powerhouse of the United States, all condensed into one person. And then, third, and maybe most importantly, there's the Supreme Court, whose opinion has the ability to change the way the United States functions based off of how they interpret the constitutionality of our created laws. So, it's now realized that the Supreme Court is very important in the United States when deciding how things carry out, whether it be how Roe v. Wade decided the whether it be how Roe v. Wade decided the impact of abortion and how it was accessed in the United States, or whether it be the federal trade uh, a group versus the a group of voters in the United States to decide how political groups should be allowed, how individuals should be allowed to donate to political action groups. Regardless, the way the Supreme Court thinks is very important. So, when I was asked the question, will the Supreme Court play a major role in the 2024 presidential election? I answered yes, for three areas of analysis. First, looking at the insurrection clause, a part of the 14th Amendment. Second, looking at how this insurrection clause has a potential case to knock Trump out of the 2024 presidential election. And third, how Trump being knocked out of the presidential election could have a huge impact. So let's begin. Again with the insurrection clause. According to the 14th Amendment in 1868, those who engage in insurrection against the United States can no longer serve in any office, whether it be political, military, or civilian, an elected office, unless they are voted in by two-thirds of the combined Congress, the Senate and the House. Now, it is already shown that it is difficult for someone to bypass this, especially in today's political era, where we see that Congress is divided more than it ever has been before. With bipartisan issues being almost non-existent, it's very unlikely that someone will be able to overcome that requirement of the 14th Amendment. And according to AP News in December of 2020, the Supreme Court will be facing a case where they will have to consider whether or not Donald Trump's actions on January 6 would be considered insurrection against the United States. And if they decide so, it could potentially kick him off of every single state primary ballot in the United States, completely taking him out of the 2024 presidential election. So, now that the context is set, let's get into the second area of analysis, looking at, again, the case against Trump. According to PBS in January of 2024, they say that Trump supporters' actions on January 6 in 2020 are often argued to have been a case of insurrection, especially when led by Donald Trump. Their argument stems from the fact that before the riot happened on January 6th, Donald Trump was seen giving a speech where he allegedly encouraged his voters to go and basically give Congress a piece of their mind, to give their local politicians in Washington, D.C. a piece of their mind. And this then resulted in them storming the Capitol building to try and overthrow the counting of the election, the counting of the votes. What this is basically showing is that if from a certain perspective, many people see this as a case of Donald Trump leading an insurrection against the United States, therefore enacting the insurrection clause of the 14th Amendment, where going into 2024, he's not eligible to be president. According to Al Jazeera in January 2024, two states in specific have brought this up to the Supreme Court when those states chose to not include Trump on their ballot, that being Colorado and Maine. Because both of these states kept them off their ballot. However, a lot of people kind of had a problem with this. And the way things work in the United States is that whenever a problem gets too big for local courts to settle, it goes to Supreme Court, where they will then decide the constitutionality of a decision made by a group or a state. Now, regardless of what may or may not happen, whether or not the United States, whether or not Colorado and Maine get their way or not. What's important to see is that if it is voted, if the Supreme Court does vote to kick Donald Trump out of the race, we could see huge impacts. According to CBS, in January 2024, if Donald Trump is kicked out of the 2024 presidential election, the de facto candidate, therefore, is then Nikki Haley, because everybody else, like Ron DeSantis, Vivek Ramaswamy, and Chris Christie, have already dropped out of the race and have given their support one way or the other. It's just Nikki Haley left, really, for the Republicans. But this might be a good thing. CBS goes on to further show that in multiple election scenarios that they studied and pulled out, they saw that if it was Donald Trump versus Biden in the 2024 election, Biden would win the election. If it was Ron DeSantis versus Joe Biden in the election, Biden would win the election. However, if it was Nikki Haley versus Biden, Nikki Haley, because she is a young woman with many ideas that are seen as more moderate in comparison to people like Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis, as well as being a younger politician and basically the exact opposite of the problem that people have with Joe Biden. A lot of the studies show that Nikki Haley would actually overtake Biden in a one-on-one election, therefore showing that if the Supreme Court decided that Donald Trump was in violation of the 14th Amendment, and that he would therefore be taken off of all state primary ballots, then therefore we could see that the entire result of the election could change entirely from the incumbent president to the upcoming Republican. So again, when I was asked the question, will the Supreme Court play a major role in the 2024 presidential election, I answered yes. First, because we see that there is because the 14th Amendment states that those who engage in insurrection against the United States basically kind of sort of cannot get elected into most positions. Second, we see that there's a decent case against Trump in the regards of this insurrection clause, showing that he could potentially not be on the ballot in 2024. And third, finally, we analyze the potential reality of what could happen and realize that for Republicans, this might actually be a good thing.